upon a time, there was a small town teacher who had been a teacher in the community that she lived in for so long that the kids she had had in her first class had now grown up and had kids of their own and were now sending them to her class. Everyone in the small town where this teacher lived knew and loved her not only because she was an excellent teacher, but she was also very kind. One day, when the teacher got to work, she found a handwritten note on her desk that simply said, "Good afternoon. I will be around tomorrow. I wonder if I might stop by your house for tea tomorrow afternoon. Your friend, God." At first, the teacher thought that it was a joke. But the more that she thought about it, she realized that if it was a joke, it was not a very funny one. Then she thought, what if it is not a joke? What if God were really coming to her house tomorrow afternoon? And that evening, as soon as she got home from work, she cleaned her house from top to bottom and brought in fresh flowers from her garden and put them in a vase in the living room. She even put out a mat on the front porch that said "Welcome" on it. She wasn't sure what God liked to eat, so she made a casserole and a fruit salad and baked some bread and cookies. She was also not sure if God preferred their tea hot or iced, so she made both. She even made a batch of lemonade in case God was not actually in the mood for tea. As soon as she had put the food on the table, she heard a knock at the door. She took a deep breath, opened the door slowly, and was surprised to find the mayor of the town on the other side. "Hello," the mayor said. "I was walking by and smelled the delicious fresh baked bread." "I'm so glad you're here. Come in," said the teacher. "I'm expecting a very important visitor who you might want to meet. Please come in and make yourself at home." As the mayor and the teacher were sitting and having a conversation together, the teacher heard another knock at her door. She got up and slowly opened the door and found a group of children in her class. "Hello, we were walking by and noticed the smell of fresh baked cookies," the children said. "Come in. I'm expecting a very important visitor who you might want to meet," said the teacher. A short time later, the teacher heard another knock at the door. When she opened it, the entire Women's Covenant group from church were on her doorstep. "Hello, we heard the tea kettle and laughter and thought you might be having a party." That afternoon, almost everyone in town stopped by at the teacher's house, lured by yummy smells and happy sounds. The teacher's house was filled with people upstairs and downstairs and overflowed into the backyard and the front yard. Some of the townspeople even brought food that they had made in their homes to the party, and everyone who was there ate together, and the sun set and the moon rose. The teacher had such a good time that she completely forgot about her very important guest. As she waved goodbye to her friends at the end of the evening, she felt only contentment for having had such a lovely party. But as the teacher walked to work the next morning, a thought suddenly crossed her mind. Whatever happened to God? And when she got to work, she found another handwritten note on her desk. "I had such a wonderful time yesterday. The bread was delicious and the cookies were divine. Tea mixed with lemonade is my very favorite. Thank you for being such a wonderful host. I hope we can do it again soon. Love, God." This story is told by Becky Brooks, a director of religious education with over 15 years of experience in UU faith development work. Like many apocryphal stories and urban legends, it is highly unlikely that there was an actual small town and an actual teacher to whom these events occurred. Also, like most stories, whether the events are true or not is irrelevant. It is about the message and the wisdom contained in the story that it has to share with us. The word generosity is a word that we hear lifted up in churches often, especially this time of year as we get closer to the holidays. While the word itself is fairly innocuous, it is one of those loaded church words that make people squirm and shift uneasily in their seats. This is perhaps because generosity is usually mentioned in the same breath as another loaded church word that makes people squirm in their seats: duty. Generosity is seen as something that we, as good, upstanding church folks, have an obligation to do. Essentially, it is used as a litmus test for how good and upstanding we are. The more that we are able to give, especially if it is financial, the better and more devout that we are seen in the eyes of others, hopefully divine. The less that we are able to give, the more guilt and shame that we are made to feel, because how dare we are not willing to give. This kind of thinking has been reinforced by many churches over the years, but I feel that it completely misses the mark of what generosity is supposed to mean and supposed to be. I can remember always hearing in the church I grew up in mentioning that generosity is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Although I'm sure it was intended both as a joke and a little bit of a guilt trip, it brings up an important point. If you look at the definitions of generosity, they are the quality of being kind and generous, or the quality or fact of being plentiful and large. In both cases, there is never any mention or allusion to what is actually given. What is important is that it is the action of giving in the first place. Taken even further, to be generous is showing readiness to give more of something than is strictly expected, and comes from the same Latin root as the word generate and genus, both words concerned with life and giving life. In essence, true generosity is the choice to do or to give more than what is expected in order to give life or bring about quality of life for others. Take the example of the teacher that we heard in the story from earlier. As romantic as the image of baking bread and cookies is to our minds, even the most passionate and skilled of bakers will tell you that it is not an easy task. You have to gather the ingredients, measure out the ingredients, mix them together, knead the dough, wait for the dough to rise, preheat the oven, bake the bread, take the bread out of the oven, and allow it to cool completely before you can slice the bread and give it to someone. All of this takes time. Time that the teacher could have spent doing other things about her day. But she made the choice to give of her time and do everything that was involved because she wanted to be sure that God or someone else had fresh bread to eat. The tea that the teacher served required finding the tea, waiting for the water to boil, and waiting for the tea to steep before she could serve it. The iced tea that the teacher made required all of the previous steps, but then pouring the tea over ice, which the teacher had to either buy or make, and waiting for it to cool down. But she made the choice to give of her time and do everything that was involved because she wanted to be sure that God felt cared for and had options based on what kind of tea that they preferred and wanted. And even though all of this food and drink was done in the expectation that God was going to show up at her door, it still did not stop her from making the choice to invite the mayor and the children and the women's covenant group and the rest of the townspeople into her home to partake of the same things she had set out for God in the first place. If it was good enough for God, it was good enough to share with others well. Sometimes I think that we tend to overthink the concept of generosity. We tend to inflate it in our minds and make it into something more complicated and grandiose than it actually has to be. As much as our financial contributions are necessary and appreciated, we forget that we are part of the interconnected web of all existence. And we all have things, however small and insignificant that they may seem, that we can share with others. Gifts of time, talents, and presence. As much as the teacher was willing to share the things that she had made for others that stopped by, those who stayed were able to offer and give of themselves by sharing laughter and good conversation. Maybe they were able to talk with people whom they did not usually communicate with. And maybe that had an impact on their lives in ways that were unexpected and ultimately serendipitous. What I do know is that the teacher's choice of being willing to share inspired an entire town of individuals to choose to share of themselves and share with others. I do not know if God ever physically showed up or not to the party, but I am sure that they were present on that day. As we move into this time of year where we will be inundated with messages pressuring us to give and give more of ourselves, I invite you to stop and ask the question, what do I have to share with others that is more than strictly necessary or expected? And I invite you to not overthink the answer to the question. Even if it is reaching out to a friend or neighbor or another member of this church to simply ask, how are you doing? Whatever you choose to do to give life to other people, you are exercising your generosity muscles in the best way possible. May it ever continue to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.